Would you move back to the UK?
God no, the weather's terrible. Taxes are very high. Don't get me wrong, I'm very patriotic, but it's no.
Meet Alexander Knight, originally from London, UK. He once lived in Russia and has now been calling Singapore home for 18 years. Alexander explained how the cost of living in Singapore has skyrocketed over the years, recounted amusing stories from his time in Russia, and provided tips on making millions through whiskey investments. I'm Max, an entrepreneur and YouTuber. Let's go!
What's the best things for you to be in Singapore?
Ease of access. Getting in and out of the country is very straightforward. Financial sector is very strong. We have an MAS listed whiskey cask fund, which is really good for the Whiskey Cask Club generally, but also it's a great regulatory environment to be part of. Ability to keep up with changing regulations in the financial sector is great, and it's one of the best places in the world to bank and to run a company. It's very simple and straightforward. You follow the rules, everything's easy, everything's online, there's no messing about.
One of the things I like about the place is like the variety of interesting people living there. And because there is no traffic, so it's easy to get from place to place. So basically you meet more interesting people within like 20 minutes reach from the place you stay compared to other places. That's what I think the big thing about Singapore.
And so we live in Novena, and so on our doorstep is Ballister Road on one side, and you know, the two malls at United Square and Velocity, and it's like everything in the middle of that is kind of really interesting. There's a lot of interesting stuff going on there, and it's all this nice heritage Singapore life, which is sort of low rise, which is kind of more my style than high rise buildings. So lots of good friends around there too. You know, you just go and hang out, and you know, the food's pretty okay around there too. And so it's kind of a nice place to spend weekends. But you're right, get in a cab, 10 minutes, you're completely on the other side of town. Yeah. And you can go and see a friend for an hour in Jurong. And it doesn't take you an hour to get there, it takes like 15 minutes. Whereas so we've got one of my colleagues from Melbourne in town now. And he says, well, you know, to get anywhere in Melbourne takes 40 minutes. So you can't just pop over and see someone for half an hour, whereas you can just hop in a cab and be there in 10 or 15 minutes. So the size is good and it's manageable. I think you're right, the variety of people here is really interesting. Great melting pot. I mean, along this street, this is like Little France here, but it's also Little Korea too. So it's like you've got all this great stuff in one very small place. You
came here 18 years ago. What changes do you see? Like how you felt about Singapore?
It's so expensive now.
Yeah.
It's so expensive. As a Londoner, as someone who grew up in London, you spend time in London, in Moscow also, and you come here and you're here, and it was cheap, much cheaper when we got here. It was probably 80% of the price of London, maybe less. Now, it's probably 140% of the price of London.
You think so?
Yeah, I know so.
I think like property, like apartment to rent is expensive, but the rest, it kind of depends on you. You can spend less, you can spend more in Singapore.
The calculation is normally done over the price of a pint, and pints are more expensive here by a long way.
Yeah, pints as well, of course, yeah.
That's the way that a lot of stuff's calculated. It's pints of milk and pints of beer. And both are more expensive here in Singapore. Cars, you can't really compare them because it's the COE and the taxes and things like that. But everything in Europe's just a lot cheaper than it is in Singapore now. It is what it is. I mean, the taxes are low. So, I mean, you have, you know, it's a give and take, I suppose. But calculating everything together, children in private school, property costs, car costs, your living expenses, on an average basis, it's about 10 to 15% cheaper in London, on average, which is quite interesting because it used to be the other way around.
What other biggest changes you see in Singapore?
It's much harder to employ people who aren't Singaporeans. So they've really tightened up the rules on that, and it's a real problem. We're a sales organization. We sell whiskey casks, casks of whiskey, and we need sales staff. And getting people who are willing to work hard as salespeople in Singapore is not as easy as it used to be. And I think that is a major differentiator from when we first got here. Everyone was a little bit more fighting for their rice bowl than they seem to be nowadays. I mean, infrastructure, it's awesome here, and we all see MBS has gone up, and 12 years ago, however many it was. So that wasn't here when I got here. With 2 new underground lines in too. So I mean, there are physical changes, but the reality is it's becoming a lot harder to operate as a company in Singapore, and you find that there are some situations where I wish things were a little bit more lenient, let's put it that way, but they seem to be just tightening up the screws. You had the foreign minister saying that foreign talent was just a tool or something similar to that, which was, I think, most foreigners were pretty annoyed by, aghast by, I think. And I think since then, a lot of people have been making their decisions about leaving the country and letting people just get on with it themselves here in Singapore, which is an issue because Singapore's a great place to live. And we all pay our taxes and everyone's, likes living here. But when you feel that you're just like the hired help, it doesn't give you much reason to want to stay. It's like if you're a shareholder in a company, it gives you more of an interest in that company as opposed to just being an employee. And I think that's one of the most significant changes since we got here in 2006.
Would you move back to the UK?
God, no. The weather's terrible. Taxes are very high. Don't get me wrong, I'm very patriotic, but it's no. I love visiting England and in Britain generally. It's a lovely country, but if I want to live there, don't think so. Honestly, the weather's terrible. Speaking about real estate, because before whiskey business, you were in kind of real estate. What would be your advice? Like, should you go for buying? Or? No. The market's too roller coaster here. The best time to have bought would have been in 2008, and I know hindsight is 2020, but the market's really toppy here at the moment. There are much better markets to buy. I mean, if you want someone to live, then obviously you should buy to live in it.
Yeah.
But if you're buying for investment, there are loads of better countries to buy in. I mean, Thailand, for example, is a much better place to buy. Prices in Thailand are coming down at the moment, so in Phuket particularly, because that big spike in Russians buying property in Phuket has stopped and it's come to the end. And so the prices are coming off. But I mean, they'll stabilize. I mean, so so I'd wait. If you're going to buy anything, I'd buy in Thailand, but not until next year. Until the late part of this year anyway. Not in Singapore, not in Australia, not in the UK. At the moment, but you do your research, because the thing is that there are some great places to buy property, like Bulgaria, for example, which is going up a huge amount, and Romania, all these new European Union member countries. The markets are going because they've started off at a relative low standpoint, and they've got a long way to grow. But Asia, Philippines, no property law that you have to basically be Filipino or buy it through a company, which is always a bit suspect. Thailand's much easier to do that sort of thing, but Singapore, the market is like you're buying in at the top of the market at the moment if you're buying in Singapore.
You originally from the UK?
I'm from London, yeah.
From London. So you were born in London?
I'm a Londoner, born and raised. The story about how I got to Russia is probably the most interesting thing, and then how I got here afterwards. My mother studied Russian at the School of Slavonic Studies in London.
Wow, how come?
She wanted to be a communist.
Wow.
She never became a communist, but she had the very, very socialist ideas. And so she wanted to understand socialism and communism. So she went to study Russian and then became a journalist. She worked for some big UK newspapers, including the Evening Standard, The People, The Mirror, The News of the World, and a few others, who in the 60s sent her to the Soviet Union. And she's quite well known for this. Her name was Gloria Stewart. She died, unfortunately, last year. She was basically finding out information about what was going on in the Soviet Union before the secret services, the UK and the Americans. Like, she knew that Brezhnev had been, not Brezhnev, Khrushchev had been deposed because she was out in Moscow in the middle of the night one day, and all the portraits were being taken down. And so this was in the middle of the night. So she called up the newspapers and that she worked for, and Khrushchev's been deposed. And then she called the papers first, and then she called the British embassy second. So that was one of many big scoops that she had. So after the collapse of the Soviet Union in '91, because she was thrown out for interviewing Solzhenitsyn's wife in '74, I think it was, and so persona non grata type of thing. Although she wasn't a diplomat, she was never allowed back into the Soviet Union. In '91, she went back through Finland across the land border because she could only get a visa into Russia even then. And she said to me, "Come to Moscow in April 1992." I was there in October '93, standing by the tanks that were shelling the White House.
Wow.
Which was kind of cool.
Yeah, that was one of these big events in new Russian history.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, smoking cigarettes and drinking vodka with the tank crews. They were the good guys.
Yeah. What was the craziest stories that happened to you?
This actually was in 2003, I think, or maybe 2004. We were traveling to St. Pete. So my friend and I decided at 1 o'clock or 11 o'clock at night to get on a train and go to St. Petersburg.
Yeah, before Sapsan.
Yeah. And we turned up and we bribed the conductor to let us on. And the only place that we could sit was in the dining, because everything was full. So they put us in the dining cart, where we proceeded to order vast amounts of vodka and snacks, and as the Russians call them, zakuski, and various bits of caviar and all that sort of stuff, because why not? And it was the middle of the night. And
your friends were Russian?
Mm-hmm,
or?
Yeah, Russians.
Yeah.
And so there was a policeman who came and sat down and drank with us, and then got bored of us and then threw us off the train in Bologoye. Because we didn't have any money left to bribe him with. He wanted it was like 1,000 rubles or something like that. It wasn't very much. And we're like, we've spent all our money feeding you drink and snacks, so we've got no money left. We needed to get to an ATM. And so he threw us off the train, and we're standing there on the platform. It's in the middle of the summer, so it's not so bad. And these FSBshniki, the FSB guys, came up, and they could see that I was an easy target, and so they're like sitting there, and I'm standing on the platform speaking to my buddy in Russian. So they walk over to me and they start speaking to me in Russian. I looked at them and I said, "I don't speak Russian." And so they're like, "Yes, you do. You were just speaking Russian." I said, they just pretended not to understand them. So they took me my buddy and I into a interrogation room in the train station, where I proceeded to ignore them, and then I pulled out my journalist propuska, which is an identity card.
Yeah.
And they promptly got extremely worried. And then paid for us to get on the next train to St. Petersburg, so we would just leave. So we'd get out of there, and that we wouldn't be their problem anymore.
What do you think the biggest misconceptions about Russia in the so-called West?
It's not the bears in the streets. It's I think people are just a bit scared now, and that is actually, and people conflate the government with the people. So, and I think that's a big problem. The government of Russia is doing its best to join the government and the people, and that's not the way that it should be, because it's the government is not a representation of the people, because it's not a democratically elected system. So I think one of the biggest misconceptions is that people think that the Russians are bad, like the government. And I would like to disavow people of that, because Russian people are not. They're awesome.
I actually caught, I caught myself connecting myself with what started to 2 years ago, basically. I was, for a few months, I was like ashamed of being Russian. So it was huge effect on all the Russian section, all my Russian friends. I remember I was going with my daughter to a football class for kids, and they were like, the teachers were asking, "Hey, where you from?" Like, and pointing to the kids. I was like, please don't point at Lisa, my daughter, because I don't want to say out loud. It was March 2022. But then actually, I think last year, I kind of switched to dissociate myself, like separate myself from the government. I'm not the government. I'm not representing the government interests. And it's like, I'm more connected to Russia's history and like Dostoevsky and this kind of stuff. Because these guys, they will be gone at some point, the government guys, but the Russia will be still there. So I'm Russian not because of, these guys.
If you know someone who would be a great interviewee for my channel, particularly foreigners living abroad, please send me a message about them. You'll find the email in description. Thanks so much, and back to the video.
How you come up with the idea of whiskey business?
When COVID was on, and when everyone was making Zoom calls to people around the world, my old buddy and I had a chat, and he goes, "Have you ever tried to sell whiskey casks?" I'm like, "No." And he goes, "Well, you got the big databases, so let's try it." And we did, and it's like, oh, this is quite a viable business. It's just one of those really interesting businesses because it's not very many people know about what whiskey investment is, and it's a cost of time thing because when you've got whiskey that's so the ones at the top of the shelf there they don't have age stamps on them, so they're worth less than the 12-year-old Macallan, which is virtually nothing left in, but there's a 12-year-old Cali leather, which are all worth considerably more than those no age stamp whiskies. And that's where does that value come from? Is from the cost of time that the whiskey sits in these dark barrels in Scotland aging, and nobody knows that, or very few people know it. But a lot of people drink whiskey, but not many people understand how it gets its value from and how the value is derived.
How many casks do you have in your investment portfolio?
Oh, hundreds.
Hundreds of
casks.
Yeah,
hundreds and hundreds. And we've got a couple of hundred clients, 400 or 500 casks.
What is the price of the most expensive whiskey cask
that we've sold?
Yeah,
£462,000 for a 30-year-old Macallan.
So basically $1 million Sing dollars, kind of.
About 800, but yeah.
Almost, yeah.
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah. And what's the starting point of the cask?
Around £5,000. There's a lot of things that determine the price. Yes, age is a factor, but then you've got what kind of whiskey it is, the brand, because Macallans fetch more money than other brands because of their fantastic marketing. You've got what cask it's in, the type of wood that it might be in. So there are lots of determining factors in it. The newer the whiskey, the new make is generally cheaper than 5-10-year-old whiskey. But that's kind of the normal progression because it's a linear increase in cost of the whiskey bottles themselves.
Yeah.
And every cask ends up in a bottle. So that's where the determining factor comes.
What would be the way to approach this kind of investment? Is it like long-term, short-term?
Long-term.
Like what's the yield?
We say that you're best holding it from 5 to 10 years. That's a general market average, is that it's 5 to 10 years. However, it's your cask of whiskey once you've bought it, so you can sell it the next day if you should you choose to.
And what's the yield?
It depends on the whiskey, but it can range from anywhere between 12 and 18%.
It's pretty high for investment. What's the risks?
If you look at the pricing in the shops, it's pretty apparent that the older the whiskey gets, the more expensive it becomes, and that is cost of time while it's in the cask. It's just the way that the market is, and it's always been that way, and it's been like this for hundreds of years. These barrels have to live somewhere in a bonded warehouse somewhere and age, and that is the cost of time is why it becomes more expensive. Otherwise it'd be like bourbon, they can mass produce it.
And trying to understand the risks. Let's say if it's well to 18%, tomorrow I'll sell my property in Phuket and just go fully to this kind of investment.
You probably should. At the end of the day, if you put money into this, you can go and visit your casks. They're there, and you get a situation where they will increase. I mean, it's as simple as that. There's a business where it's a buy, hold, and sell for roughly double the price after 5 years. On average, you've got a situation where people shouldn't put everything in whiskey. I mean, it's generally a bad idea to put all your eggs in one basket. But you know, it's an alternative investment, and as far as alternative investments, a lot of people are putting 5 to 10% of their assets into it. What are the risks? The risks are people stop drinking,
which will never happen.
Which will never happen. There is an FX risk, you know, because everything's derived in pounds. As the whiskey's bought and sold in pounds, there is a risk against sterling, but it's a pretty, I mean, it is risk, but sterling's relatively stable. Largely, you know, US dollar, SGD, sterling, these kind of currencies are quite flat, largely. I mean, the variations are very small. This is Caribbean rum cask. This is really, really nice. This one's a little bit more smoky. We'll try this to start with. Nazaroya.
Amazing. Super mild, like very soft.
But it's the same strength as vodka.
Yeah.
It's a killer. People who buy our whiskey it's not really a race demographic, it's more of an age demographic, and typically between 25 to 65. After 65, they're buying it for grandchildren. Because you've got to hang on to it for 5 to 10 years to make real money out of it. So, you know, people who are in their 60s are a bit, well, you know, am I going to be around in 15 years' time? But so they buy it for their family members, but everyone else buys it as an investment asset.
Okay, physically, if I buy a cask, where it's been held?
So they're in bonded warehouses in Scotland. I don't know if you can see that on the camera.
Yeah.
So they're dotted around Scotland. There are currently around 30 million casks in warehouses around Scotland. 4 million are produced every year, and they're all kept in these bonded warehouses, which are basically government regulated warehousing.
Yeah.
So that then when we sell whiskey, we include 5 years of storage, which includes insurance too.
So that was my next question. What if the fire happens?
It's insured. And no one's going to steal it either because they weigh 500 kilos.
Yeah.
I mean, you could siphon some out if you could get past all the security of the bonded warehouses and find the cask, uncork it, and take some out. It's not really likely to happen.
Yeah.
They're all monitored by CCTV 24/7.
What if someone from our audience want to, let's say, they reach out and want to invest in cask whiskey? Can you do anything? Let's say they mention Chernov. Can you do any special discount
absolutely.
or something?
What's the lucky number in Russian?
Lucky number.
In China's 8.
Yeah, I don't think it exists in Russia, honestly.
Well, okay, well, let's do 8%.
8%.
8% special price.
Okay.
Off the cask.
Off the cask. That's amazing. Cool. We will leave a link to your services.
Brilliant.
Cool. What's your main life principles? Something really important that, let's say, you teach your children.
Tell the truth. Just try and be as honest as you can be while protecting yourself. Don't eat too many French fries.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, the reality is at the end of the day, I want this business to be multi-generational. A good, solid, don't make stuff up to clients is something. It's like just general. It's just good practice. Be a nice person as much as you can be.
Yeah.
But defend yourself if you need to.
What's the meaning of life for you?
Peace and quiet, and being able to get on with life without let or hindrance. And it's making sure everyone around me is looked after. It's meaning of life for me is not about me. It's about my family, because they're more important than I am.